Good adventures, everybody. I'm Melissa Bonzak, and welcome to episode 146 of Books Cubed, the show where I chat with indie authors you should be reading. And this week, that's moi. And you're not going to hear me talking to you. You're going to hear my fabulous voice actor, aka narrator, Rebecca Brokaw-Sands, narrating the first 4 chapters of my portal fantasy, Amy of Earth Freefall. So if you like portal fantasy, you'll want to stick around and listen. Here's the description from the back of the book. When Amy falls through a mysterious portal, she finds herself in a world without humans where fierce, war-driven creatures rule. Captured by a ruthless myrmidon, she is declared a slave and her fate seems sealed. But in this dangerous land, she discovers unexpected allies. A childlike shapeshifter, a wine-guzzling thicket, and a Kugel seeking vengeance for her brother's death. Desperate to return to her world, Amy must convince them to help her escape before the Myrmidon general forces her into servitude. Can she find a way home? Well, there's still time. Spoiler alert, she does not find a way home in this book. Anyway, this is the first book in a series. I don't know how many books there will be, but there will be quite a few. This is book 1. The ebook and the paperback and the audiobook are out. Book 2, the paperback and the ebook are out, and the audiobook is being finalized. It's almost done. And I will warn you, book 1 does end in a cliffhanger. Book 2 does not. Book 3 is almost done, and book 3 will be part of the 3-book series that will be on Kickstarter later in the year. So let's get right to listening. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you after.
Chapter 1. Amy and the Unbearable Bear. Amy willed her eyes to stay at the dead bear's neckline. Not that there was much to see above it. Somebody had gone after it with a pretty big gun. Rust-colored splotches stained the fringed black collar, but thanks to the bright lights above the stainless steel table, if she moved her head just a bit, she could make out the 3 iridescent symbols stitched into the fabric. She rubbed her nose with the back of an arm, careful not to touch her skin with her gloved hand, and sniffed. Thanks to the overwhelming scent of peppermint coming off the carcass, she wanted to find a tissue and step outside. But this bear was unlike anything she'd ever seen, and she couldn't turn away. It certainly wasn't your typical picnic basket thief. The animal's body was covered in long, thick strands of dark fur that seemed more like hair as it spilled over the sides of the table toward the floor, and the animal's front limbs were missing, probably from birth. The shoulders rounded down to its sides as though the appendages had never been an option. White linen pants were buttoned at the center of its chest, and the same symbols from the collar were repeated down one of the legs. Amy looked up, catching the eye of the rifle-toting guard by the plywood door. He seemed like a silly addition. They were in a portable morgue made out of a tent roughly 15 feet square. The canvas was heavy, but the entrance he was blocking wouldn't be the only way in or out if someone was determined. A few feet to his left stood Dr. Marcus Bex. The anthropologist had turned her life upside down in the few short hours that she'd known him, dragging her from a surprisingly successful signing for her new book, where a whopping 23 kids and their folks had shown, to a remote location somewhere in one of those middle-of-the-country square states. She'd already forgotten which one. Yeah, she was a children's book author. But she hadn't been surprised when he'd introduced himself and made his request. People came to her all the time to hear her opinions on various aspects of mythology, despite the fact that she hadn't officially worked in the field in the 8 years since graduating from Berkeley, with an MA in mythological studies. That's what having a dead mother who is the world's leading expert on a specific subject does for you. Marcus grinned, gave her 2 thumbs up, and she fought the urge to return the gesture. His Christmas morning enthusiasm was a nice contrast to the sterile atmosphere of the tent. His curly black hair and frat boy good looks didn't hurt either. She realized she'd been staring a bit too long when he tilted his head toward the tent's 4th occupant and circled the air with one finger as if to say, "Get on with it." Amy gave him a small nod. I said pet, General Decker, because it smells like it just had a bath, though peppermint shampoo is an odd choice. And it's wearing clothes. She leaned forward to admire the workmanship of the leather shoes. Whoever made these knew what they were doing. They're probably a hardcore Rennie. The two-star general cleared her throat. Rennie? Sorry, that's what my mom always called them. Amy ran a gloved finger along the sole of one shoe. Hardcore lovers of all things medieval. Look at that hand-stitching. The animal's owner, or whoever they bought these from, obviously takes great pride in their work. I bet they're a blast to hang out with. Miss Porter, the general folded her arms across her chest. I'm not interested in fun, nor am I interested in footwear. Amy didn't doubt either statement. The deep lines around the woman's eyes and lips told her that the pinched expression was standard equipment, and somebody in a perpetual state of annoyance could never find joy in a strappy pink sandal or handmade leather footwear for a bear. But Amy wasn't going to let the woman's mood upset her. The stitching on the boots was exquisite, and she was going to celebrate the joy of it. Only a select group of people are dedicated enough to create something so beautiful. Something else, her mother had always said. Usually, after the woman had just chastised some poor newbie for their historical inaccuracies. She motioned for the general to come closer. If you take a look at the sole, you'll see these small, evenly spaced stitches mean the bear's owner took great care in making sure the animal's feet stayed warm and dry. They're beautiful. I mean, seriously. Huzzah! General Decker moved down the table until she was standing across from Amy. Miss Porter, I'm more interested in the writing on the collar and pants, which I thought you'd be able to read. Was Dr. Bex wrong in assuming our knowledge base extends beyond the field of cartoon dragons? She made a point of looking at the image on Amy's shirt. Amy shifted her weight and glared at the woman. Respectfully, General, this cartoon dragon paid for college, and I won the Tamray Award for Children's Literature twice. My Blasdale is a beloved bestseller. That wasn't completely true. She'd only cracked a list once, but the general wouldn't know that. Decker rubbed an eye with the back of her hand. Yes, I know who Blasdale is. It's my granddaughter's favorite book. Really? Amy's face softened. Her favorite? She hated to admit how much those words meant to her. The degree had made her father proud. But every time she signed a book for a kid, she felt like a superhero. Would you like me to autograph a copy for her? She jabbed a finger at her backpack, hung on a rack by the door, next to the guard who was now looking at her like she was the biggest idiot in the known universe. Even Marcus was shaking his head. Or maybe later. She swallowed the grin and turned her attention back to the symbols on the pants. I'm going to need some time to study these. How long? The general asked. I've already held off on the necropsy so that you could see the subject in its state of arrival. It's not like I have a dictionary and can just look them up. I thought that was exactly what it was like, Miss Porter. General Decker nodded to Marcus, who dug into his messenger bag and retrieved a hardcover book. Its white cover graced with a single-horned, three-eyed, shaggy black creature from Cantabrian folklore. Amy scoffed at the lute dangling from the cord around the Kugel's neck. An idiotic choice made by the book's publisher, since the creature's hands are fingerless. Plucking a lute would have been downright impossible. At least they hadn't changed her mother's title. Ethnography in Folklore, a study of cultures and customs in mythology. If you have my mother's book, why am I here? Every college student for the last 20 years had been forced to study her mother's book and could probably recite passages verbatim. Because Dr. Bex wasn't able to decode these symbols, and I was assured that as Dr. Elizabeth Porter's daughter, you might have an insight that others lack. Marcus leaned into the conversation. When you were growing up, bedtime stories must have been crazy. Yeah, crazy. Amy's right hand went to the silver chain she wore around her neck. She couldn't remember a single night that her mother had ever sent her off to dreamland with a story. Her fingers traced the links in the chain until they found the oversized ring, pale blue and smooth, with a green interior half circle that, with a small amount of pressure, could slide out to become the perfect bottle opener. A delightful discovery made during her freshman year of high school, thanks to her fidgety nature. Something she never would have realized if she'd been able to wear it. But, like her mother, the ring had been too large for her fingers. When Amy had been about 4, she'd realized that toes were bigger and had asked her mother why she didn't wear the ring on the big one. Elizabeth had leaned down to kiss her daughter on the nose. "I'm not a hippie, sweetheart." It had been a rare moment between mother and daughter, and over just as quickly as it had begun, thanks to a phone call and another important research trip. So the ring had lived in her mother's office, set on a stand made of marble, high on one of the shelves behind the mahogany desk, tucked among the journals and other trinkets accumulated from years of travel. When her mother had died, just shy of her 10th birthday, it had been the only thing she'd wanted to keep. Amy let go of the ring and cleared her throat. "General, I still don't get why the military is interested in a pet bear." "That's classified. Are you able to help us or not?" "Ma'am, this isn't the movies. I can't just look at something and instantly translate it. I'm not even sure these symbols represent letters. They could just be a pretty pattern someone came up with. Without more to go on, I really can't tell you what culture, if any, they come from. Wouldn't it just be easier to try to figure out who owned the bear and ask them? Maybe it's microchipped." The general nodded once. "Show her." Amy turned to follow the woman's line of sight. "Show me what?" Marcus set his messenger bag on a small metal cart and wheeled it over. He dug out a folder, flipped it open to reveal a grainy image in ghostly monochrome green, and Amy felt the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. The photo showed a creature that resembled the Kugel on the cover of her mother's book. It was wearing the same pants as the dead bear on the table, and it was very much alive. Chapter 2. Amy and the Million Pieces. "What the hell is this?" Amy snatched the photo and shook it in the general's direction. Decker raised an eyebrow. "I thought you were familiar with your mother's work." "Yes, but Kugels are mythological. They're not real." The general tilted her head to gaze down at the steel table. "This one looks pretty real to me." "Okay." Amy tucked the photo under an arm and stepped back from the bear to do a slow clap. She should have known. A government agency wanting to pay her a lot of money for her expertise on a mythological matter seemed too good to be true. And now that it was revealed to be nothing more than a big joke, she just wanted to go home. "You got me. Excellent setup. Kudos to your production team." She raised her hands to applaud the camera she couldn't see. "I'm surprised that ONAT can afford something on this scale." Her mother's publisher was stepping up. She'd have to call her dad when she got home. He'd get a big laugh out of the whole affair. "What are you talking about, Miss Porter?" Amy rolled her eyes. "The 20th anniversary of my mom's book. I'm sure you'll get tons of views on whatever socials you plan on using." She leaned down to sniff at the bear. "But you could have sold it better if this thing had actually smelled like a bear." She straightened up and gave the general a mock salute. "But again, huzzah!" She glanced around the room and waved at the walls and ceiling. "Don't forget to buy the new Blasdell adventure. Blasdell goes to Broadway everywhere you find books." The general straightened her jacket. "Miss Porter, are you under the impression that this is some sort of gag?" "Isn't it?" "Do you think the U.S. government wastes its time promoting college textbooks?" Amy plucked the photo out from under her arm and shook it in the general's direction. "Then explain this." "That, Miss Porter, is exactly what it looks like." Amy shifted her weight as she stared at the image, and then down at the bear on the table. This was supposed to be a Kugel? A real-life Kugel? But those things weren't real. This was a joke. This had to be a Wait. There was something wrong. She angled the photo. The creature on the table could have been a match for the one in the picture. The clothes were the same, so was the body, minus the head, but something nagged at the back of her brain. She ran her eyes over the photo one more time. What was bothering her? "Arms, Miss Porter," General Decker said. "You are noticing that the creature in the photo has arms." So it did. 2 of them. One where you'd normally find a right arm, and the other protruding from the center of its chest. A place no arm should be. "Where'd they go?" she asked, looking down at the body. The general raised an eyebrow. "Curious, isn't it?" It was. What's it holding? She turned the photo in her hands, the idea of the joke now forgotten. The details in the image were sharp, but the item in the hand was too small to see. "Dr. Beck's?" The general nodded to the anthropologist. Marcus eased a small cardboard box out of his messenger bag. "We don't think it's a weapon," he said as he removed the cover. The interior of the box was lined with a cushioned material molded to protect its precious contents. The base of the item was thick and smooth, 3 inches in diameter at least, 5 or 6 inches long and dark brown in color. Symbols that matched the pants were roughly gouged down the front of it. A thick loop of deep red, the size of Amy's hand, had been welded onto the end and featured an angled ridge at the top of the circle. 3 quarter-inch notches on the interior exposed a bright yellow inner track. "It was covered in a soft, fleshy substance," Marcus said. Amy drew her hand back. "Human?" "Clams." "Like lunch?" "Like lunch," he said. "I grew up in Maine, so I know a thing or two about mollusks. I bet our guy here was using this baby to crack open a few for a snack." "Are there clams around here?" They were in a farm country. She'd seen all the squared-off fields from the plane. The nearest body of water had been some sort of retention pond. Marcus laughed. "Maybe he brought them with him?" Decker cleared her throat. "A necropsy will tell us what he ate before he met his untimely end." Marcus swallowed his grin. "Of course." Amy drew a finger in the air over the clam opener. "These symbols are the same as the ones on the clothes." Decker nodded. "Yes." "Showing me the same thing over and over isn't going to help me figure out what it means." "I agree." General Decker snapped her fingers at the guard. "We'll be going down to the pit now." Amy felt a wave of goosebumps wash over her arms and chest. "That doesn't sound good." "Oh, it's good, Miss Porter." For just a moment, the general's face softened. "It's very good." The guard mumbled something into a walkie-talkie, and the door beside him popped open. The general went first, followed by Marcus, who almost skipped after her. He turned back and motioned for Amy to hurry. She tossed his copy of her mother's book into her backpack and grabbed her leather jacket on the way out the door. The sun was setting as the ride in the golf cart took them down a dirt road, past a farmhouse, a barn, and finally to a field of corn. The general and Marcus hopped out, and Amy squinted at her surroundings as the setting sun finished its descent, leaving them in darkness. Somewhere nearby, there had been a fire, and the air was still scented with the woodsy yet sweet smell of charred cornstalks. She slipped into the straps of her backpack and got out. "Knee-high by the 4th of July, she whispered. "What?" Marcus said. "Nothing," she said, as she zipped up her jacket. "You cold?" he asked. "It's like 75 degrees. "Thin blood." She was thankful she'd worn jeans that morning, expecting to spend the day in an air-conditioned bookstore, never dreaming she'd end up outside in the middle of Cornfield, USA. Marcus turned to the guard. "Could you run and get Miss Porter a blanket?" He tilted his head at Amy. "Are you thirsty?" When she nodded, he added, "And some water, too, please." The man glanced over at the general, who gave him some sort of cryptic signal, and the cart zoomed off, leaving the 3 of them alone. Sort of. About 20 yards up the makeshift road, the flaps of another tent didn't reach all the way to the ground, and Amy could see legs as people milled about or sat at what she guessed were desks. Someone pushed open a flap to lean out and toss a cup of liquid on the ground, and she caught sight of the words Quadrant 24 on a board above a row of computers. Then they disappeared back inside, and the view was gone. "What's that?" The general followed her line of sight. "Control center." "For what?" General Decker lifted a walkie-talkie to her lips. "Flip the switch." A loud hum from halogen lights turned night to day, and Amy threw up a hand to shield her eyes, finally focusing on Marcus, waiting for her at an uneven metal railing about 10 yards into the field. The ground leading up to him and a good 3 yards around him had been cleared by fire, and she carefully picked her way over, doing her best to keep the char off her new sneakers. "Come take a look," he told. At the rail, she kept her distance as she leaned a bit to get a quick peek at whatever was in the pit, and then gripped the metal bar with both hands. But it wasn't a fear of heights that was playing on her nerves. It was the sight below them. "Huzzah," Marcus whispered. Amy got out a soft, "Wow." "The pit is 17.7 feet across and 26.3 down," Marcus said. "We didn't dig this thing out. It somehow burned this hole when it fell from the heavens." The general snorted. "This is no UFO crash site, Dr. Bex." "It is unidentified, General." "It's not a vehicle. There's no engine." "That we can find," Marcus whispered. "It's not a UFO." "Maybe. What do you think, Amy?" This time, her wow was a bit louder. The rounded structure at the bottom of the pit was the color of honey and appeared to be made of marble. Tilted at a 45-degree angle, it was partially buried in the side of the hill. And an opening, perhaps a doorway, was ringed with broad symbols inked in black, like the ones on the bear's pants, but different than the ones on the bear's pants, or rather the Kugel's pants. "What is it?" "We're not sure," Marcus said, "but the Kugel came out of it. Whatever this is, it arrived a short time ago." "How do you know?" "This hole wasn't here the last time the farmer checked this field, and then his wife spotted what she thought was a bear a few days ago on some acreage about 5 miles from here, which would be weird because bears are not indigenous. So he set up about a dozen trail cams throughout his property. That's where the photos came from." Amy straightened up. "There's more than one?" Marcus looked down at his shoes. "They take you through the Kugel arriving to his untimely demise." Amy nodded and looked around for the general. "You could have led with this," she said when she spotted the woman. "I'll see you down there, Miss Porter. Bring your mama's book." Decker began to carefully descend a set of steep, narrow steps cut into the side of the hill. Marcus bumped Amy with his shoulder. "I told you I was going to show you something that was going to rock your world." "Huh, I figured you just had a high opinion of yourself." "Oh, I do," he said. "But we can talk more about me later tonight over drinks." "Sorry, but I think I may be busy studying whatever the hell this thing is." Amy adjusted her backpack until she could reach into the front pocket and found a pencil and small notebook. She flipped past the pages covered in story ideas for a new Blasdell book, gave the railing a little shake for sturdiness, and leaned against it to sketch the scene below, cursing herself for not having copied down the symbols on the pants as soon as she'd arrived at the makeshift morgue. "Miss Porter," the general had stopped about 10 steps down. "We have photographs of the structure?" "I'm sure you do," Amy said. "I'd like to start with the bird's eye view." Pencil to paper would help her wrap her head around the craziness. "I did the same thing," Marcus whispered. As she sketched the fourth symbol, she realized it was a repeat of the first, the fifth of the second, and the sixth of the third. This continued around the door. It's just 3 repeated over and over. She didn't catch the anthropologist's smile or nod. "Any time, Miss Porter," the general shouted up to her. Amy rushed a few finishing touches to her sketch, tucked the notebook and pencil back into her pocket, and slipped into the straps of the backpack. She laid a palm on the railing to brace herself as she leaned over to look for the general. The woman was more than halfway into the pit, and Amy had to lean a bit to see her. Her necklace swung up, and the ring hit her lip with a smack, swung again, and then crashed into her upper teeth, leaving a small cut above one of her canines. Ow! She tasted blood, but didn't have time to raise a hand to her mouth. The ground beneath her feet began to shake. "Marcus!" She got out his name as the railing swayed. Her elbow slipped and she lurched forward. She screamed as one of the straps of her backpack snapped tight against her chest, jerked her to a stop, and left her dangling above the pit. "I've got you!" Marcus shouted in her ear. There was a clap of thunder, and a rainbow of color shot up out of the opening in the wall below. The general was caught in the beam and exploded into a million pieces. Chapter 3. Amy Falls to Death. The glittery rainbow licked at the air like a flame, bits of it dripping away to flutter back down to its starting point, sizzling as chunks of light began to melt into shapes until all that remained was a delicate stained glass scene. A knight atop a black stallion, confronting an ant-like creature in a kilt, a whip coiled high over its head. Amy stared down into the pit as the scent of sweat and peaches flooded her nose. Marcus. She felt his lips at her ear. "Don't move." She didn't answer. Couldn't. She was hypnotized by the symbols around the doorway. They'd become holographic, a bright red version of each floating up from the stone wall before dissolving into nothing, then reappearing moments later to float up again. Red was a warning, right? Red sky at morning, sailor take warning. Red touches yellow, kill a fellow. Red holographic symbols on a stone house. She had no clue. Maybe an exit? But to where? As she watched, the holograms began to move faster, lifting up, dissolving, doing it again. How? Amy barely got out the word. "I'm going to push us back." "The symbols," she whispered. Marcus shifted his weight. The railing wobbled, and he and Amy sucked in a breath. "It'll fall forward," he insisted. "We'll fall back." "Wait!" Where was the guard? No, he'd gone to get water. The tent, it was full of people. They turned on the light, right? They'd save them. "From 3, Marcus whispered, his body tense against hers. "Wait! What if the rainbow came back? The general. Oh, God. She'd been sliced into a million pieces. 2. No, they'll save. 1. He got the word out as the railing broke free of its anchor and fell into the pit. For a moment, they teetered on the cliff, and Amy was sure that a hand would grab her jacket and they'd be saved. And then her backpack shifted, and a shriek clawed its way out of her throat as she fell. There was nothing but air in her screams, and she was tumbling toward the stained glass ant fighting the night. She crashed through the scene. But there was no crash. No broken glass. No cuts. Just blood as she landed on the body. She shrieked and rolled off, hitting a carpet of thick moss as she scrambled to her feet. Was it Marcus? No. In the silvery blue moonlight, the naked, blood-splattered body was face down, the skin a shade lighter than the lime-colored vines haphazardly wrapped around its head. Amy turned away and doubled over to heave at the spongy ground beneath her feet. When the spasms were gone, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, took a step, caught her foot on a vine, and fell. Tumbling and rolling down a moss-covered hill, she ended up at the bottom, flat on her back, gazing up at a patchwork of stars visible through the tall, leafless branches. She groaned, spat out a mouthful of vegetation, and pushed herself up into a seated position. She was at the bottom of a moss-covered trench between 2 banks of trees, the air light with perfume from unseen flowers, and she was alone. Where was Marcus? He'd fallen with her, right? She cupped her palms around her mouth and shouted his name, and waited desperately for an answer. But the forest around her was oddly quiet. No chirps of insects, croaks of frogs, or snaps of branches from unseen critters foraging in the night. "Which is a good thing, you idiot," she whispered. Climbing to her feet, she rubbed at a spot on her neck. "Well, that's gonna hurt tomorrow." A slow spin told her there was only one way out. She grabbed a handful of moss, dug her foot into the hill, and began to climb. When she reached the top, she dropped onto her knees and fought the urge to look over at the body. What the hell was going on? She'd fallen into the pit. How had she ended up in a forest? The stone house. She climbed to her feet and spun around from her right, almost completing the 360 before she saw it. Perched at an angle on the side of a hill, another deep trench keeping it out of reach. The holographic symbols rising up one more time to fade to nothing. And then the stone house was gone, like it had never existed. What the fuck? Movement caught her eye, and she threw herself to the ground as an enormous black horse crested the trench and leaped over her head. The rider dismounted, and Amy gazed up at a real-life version of the ant from the stained glass window. Chapter 4. Amy and the Pickup Artist. Wide nostrils flared in Amy's face as the horse's lips peeled back to reveal fangs that dripped with saliva and reeked of dead fish. A wild mane decorated with thick strands of green and red seaweed curled down its neck and back, and the horse shook its whole body at her in some sort of primitive challenge. No, not horse. Kelpie. She flashed on a memory of her mother explaining the difference between the brown horse Amy had seen in a pasture and the fiends who delighted in dragging naive humans to watery graves. She knew there was a way to control one, yet every myth she'd ever known had fled her mind in horror as she stared at a beast that shouldn't exist. Behind her, there was a clack and a high-pitched snap. The Kelpie reared up, and Amy couldn't second enough breath to scream as she waited for the creature to deliver a hoof to her head. Instead, the animal bounced on its hind legs, twisted its body, and slammed down hard, dropping its nose deep into the moss and pushing along like an oversized bloodhound until it found the mangled body and began to eat it. She turned away and threw her hands over her ears to block out the sound of tearing flesh. The tip of a sword dropped into her line of sight, and she looked up. The ant soldier had closed the distance between them. It tilted its oval-shaped head, and one of its bulging eyes blinked as it reflected the forest around them. She was dreaming. Had to be. Yet she could sense the spongy ground beneath her shoes, smell the floral scent on the light breeze, hear the sickening crunch of bones as the horse consumed its meal. It was all so vivid, so real. The ant bent toward her and waved the sword at her head. Despite the volcano of terror churning at the base of her spine, she was fascinated by what she was seeing. The creature was tall, towering a meter over her 5'6" frame. The midnight blue armor appeared to be leather, but the outfit seemed more ceremonial than functional. A tight, short-waisted jacket topped a kilt that ended just above segmented legs covered in a dark red exoskeleton. Snapping pincers extended from each side of its bare midsection, and a belt lined with pouches hung low on its hips. The arms, also segmented, ended in long, thin fingers that were wrapped around the hilt of the sword. On the top of its head, 2 antennae twitched as the creature clicked from a series of small holes centered under its eyes. The sword was swung at her head one more time, and as the ant bent closer, she stared up at her reflection and smelled peppermint, just like the bear back in that makeshift morgue. "I'm unarmed!" Amy held up her hands, hoping it would calm the creature down. All that did was make the pincers clack louder. "You speak English?" She shook her head and laughed at her own stupidity. "Of course you don't speak English. I'm dead, and you're some sort of peppermint-munching giant ant guarding the gateway between heaven and hell, while your ride snacks on bones instead of grass. Sorry, I babble when I'm terrified. Seriously, how does that noise not bother you?" She half turned to gesture at the Kelpie and looked away just as quickly. The ant moved a step closer. Amy pressed a hand to her stomach. You want me to puke again? 'Cause I'm barely holding it together here, and you're horsey over there. I ain't helping. This time, the sword stopped just shy of her nose and bounced a few times as one of the pincers snapped at the sky. Was it making a request? What do you want? Her question was met with a series of clicks and pops. Okay. She raised her hands over her head. I'm a New York girl, so while I may be terrified of you, you'll never know it thanks to my cool demeanor. The ant fake charged her, and Amy shrieked, I'm scared! What more do you want? The ant motioned again. That way? She glanced over her shoulder at the moss-covered trench she'd fallen into earlier. Already been there, done that, she said. One of the ant's pincers grabbed her leather jacket and yanked her up off her feet. Screaming, she was twirled high in the air, taking in the forest around them in a dizzying spin that only stopped when she heard the bellow of a horn. The creature holding her over its head froze. There was another loud blast, and a new kelpie galloped up the side of the trench. Amy got in a quick look at the rider, another giant ant, before she was spun again and thrown. She clenched her muscles, expecting to end up in a crevice between tree roots. Instead, she landed in a soft pile of hay. She rolled herself into a seated position. She was in a wagon, a good 20 feet from where she could see the ant up high on the hill above her. She grabbed the side of the buckboard, but before she could vault to freedom, a whip cracked across her knuckles. Yelping, she clutched her hand to her chest and turned to face a third ant, positioned in the hay on its knees. It clicked and popped at her, and Amy sat back on her heels and raised her good hand. Gotcha, not gonna move. The ant continued to click, and its long, delicate fingers gestured to Marcus, half buried in the hay.
Okay, thanks so much to Rebecca for being my voice actor, aka narrator. I love the job she did. Lennis is exactly as I pictured them to be. So I was so excited to hear that. And I hadn't thought about the way Lennis would speak, but when Rebecca spoke for them, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is exactly how Lennis would be. So I was very excited about that. And as I said before, this first book ends in a cliffhanger. I am so sorry about that. But book 2 is out, and it does not end at a cliffhanger. But the story continues. There will be many books in this series, I hope. I'm working on book 3 right now, and then I will jump into book 4 right after that finishes. So we'll see how many I can get done this year. I hope a few more. These are all thinner books. See how thick it is there. They are fast-paced. They are, well, you listen to the first 4 chapters, so you know what I'm talking about. I hope you enjoyed it, and you can drop down in the show notes. Well, in the show notes, you can find links to them, but you can drop down in the comments and leave me a comment about what you thought. So thank you for sticking around. I'm going to head out. I'm heading to Rewind Book Fair this weekend. I'll be in Minneapolis, Minnesota, April 18th and 19th, if you're listening live tomorrow. And this will go out tomorrow. So this weekend, I'm rambling, so sorry. This weekend, I will be at Rewind Book Fair, April 18th and 19th, 2026, because I know someone will listen to this in the future. So if you're going to be around there, come check me out in booth 216 and say hello. Tell me you listen to the podcast, and I'll be so happy. And buy a book, and I'll sign it. I'll also have ebooks and audiobooks there too. So I'm going to let you go now. I will see you later, and go read a good book. The Books Cube theme music was written by Laura Lynn Hardy. She performed the vibraphone. Billy Tyke Miller performed percussion, and it was recorded at Mills Kids Recording in Huntsville, Alabama.